Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. We from Group 13 will be presenting Mughal and Andalusian architecture in the Malay Archipelago.
In the 16th, 17th and the 18th centuries, the Mughals built a style of Indo-Islamic throughout the ever-changing of their empire in the Indian subcontinent. Known for its extensive use of red sandstone as a construction material, Mughal architecture first emerged and flourished during the reign of Akbar the Great during 1556 until 1605. It is a strikingly symmetrical and ornamental mixture of Persian, Turkish and Indian architecture. The architectural accomplishment under the reigns of Akbar, Jahangir, Shah Jahan and Aurangzeb.
Mughal Empire timeline 1526 to 1530 Common Era. The Mughal dynasty in India is founded by Babur, a descendant of Mughal conqueror Genghis Khan and of Turkic conqueror Tamerlane. 1530 to 1540 Common Era and 1555 to 1556 Common Era. Babur is succeeded by his son Humayun, but Humayun loses control of the empire to Afghan rebels in 1540. He regained his throne in 1555 but dies from a fall the next year. 1556 to 1605 Common Era. Humayun's son Akbar consolidates the Mughal Empire. 1605 to 1627 Common Era. Akbar's son Jahangir continues his father's administrative system and policy of religious tolerance towards Hinduism. 1628 to 1658 Common Era. The reign of Jahangir's son Shah Jahan marks the cultural zenith of the Mughal Empire. 1658 to 1707 Common Era. Jahan's son Aurangzeb comes to power in 1658. 1719 to 1803 Common Era. The empire begins to break up under the combined pressures of dynasty warfare, sectional rivalries, and attacks by various warlords and invaders. In 1803, the British East India Company assumes control over Delhi, the last remaining Mughal territory. 1719 to 1803 Common Era. The last Mughal Emperor Bahadur Shah II reigned. Characteristic of Mughal architecture. The Mughal architecture follows a consistent pattern in terms of structure and character. Mughal architecture is distinguished by bulbous domes, slender minarets with cupolas at the four corners, enormous halls, massive and arched doorways, and exquisite ornamentation. Famous building of Mughal architecture. The influence of Mughal architecture on Malaysia buildings. Mughal architecture combines Hindu and Islamic elements. The Mughal adopted Hindu ideas while borrowing architectural styles from Persia, giving rise to the Indo-Persian style. The Mughal constructed numerous forts, palaces, mosques, mausoleums, and other structures. They also created many lovely gardens. Their buildings are distinguished by the fact that the majority of them are built on massive platforms and are extremely beautiful.
The Al-Andalus Empire. Al-Andalus, also called Muslim Spain, Muslim kingdom that occupied much of the Iberian Peninsula from 711 Common Era until the collapse of the Spanish Umayyad dynasty in the early 11th century. The Arabic name Al-Andalus was originally applied by the Muslims Moors to the entire Iberian Peninsula. It likely refers to the Vandals who occupied the region in the 5th century. In the 11th century, when European Christians began to reconquer the peninsula, Al-Andalus or Andalusia came to mean only the area still under Muslim control and thus became permanently attached to the modern-day region. From 711 to 1492, Al-Andalus was the occidental frontier of Islam. Floating on the western edge of the Mediterranean, cut off from the European continent by jagged mountains, it was geographically isolated from both North Africa and Europe, from Islamic as well as Christian lands.
Characteristic of Andalusian architecture. The Andalusian architecture is defined by the Roman and Islamic legacy, which date back to 218 before Christ and 711 after Christ. These cultures have left their mark through vaulted ceilings, paved courtyards, painted tiles, water features, and century-old stone walls. Famous building of Andalusian architecture. Al-Andalus timeline. 711 Common Era. Tariq ibn Ziyad leads Umayyad to Gibraltar. 756 Common Era. Abdul Rahman arrives in Spain and established leadership in Cordoba. 785 Common Era. Abdul Rahman begins construction of the Great Mosque of Cordoba. 929 Common Era. Abdul Rahman III declares himself Caliph in Cordoba. 1085 Common Era. The Reconquista started. Alfonso VI of Leon Castile takes control of the city of Toledo. 1086 Common Era. The fanatical Almoravids from North Africa came to re-establish Islamic order and fight against the Christians. 1212 Common Era. Almohad power in Spain declines, leaving Andalusian cities vulnerable to conquest. 1250 Common Era. Cordoba and Seville were lost to the Christians. 1350 Common Era. Granada became the last bastion of Muslim control on the Iberian Peninsula. 1492 Common Era. Muslims lost all their cities in the peninsula. 1550 Common Era. In the following centuries, the Catholic monarchy became increasingly intolerant of Muslims, forcing them to convert to Christianity or flee to North Africa. Many mosques were destroyed or converted into churches. The influence of Mughal architecture on Malaysia buildings. The mosque is a place where Muslims gather 5 times a day to perform their prayers. Besides being a place of worship, the mosque has been used as a multifunctional space throughout the history of Islam in the Muslim world. Due to the different climatic and cultural conditions, local materials, and indigenous architecture of different places, numerous styles of mosque architecture were evolved. With the passage of time, the mosque architectural forms had been influenced by the changes in social, cultural, and political conditions.
The first place that has the influence of Mughal architecture is Masjid Zahir. Masjid Zahir in Al-Ustad is a prominent mosque in Malaysia. Its architecture is a century years old and arguably one of the most beautiful mosques in the world. This study looks at the elements of the Zahir Mosque architecture that are heavily influenced by Mughal architecture originating in northern India. These mosques have adapted many elements such as iron domes, dome kiosks, pishtoks, and arches. Masjid Zahir has shown a strong influence on Mughal architecture. This building has embedded architectural elements based on the characteristic of Mughal architecture, most of which are found in northern India. The most prominent Mughal element can be seen on the main dome with inverted lotus-shaped decoration, dome kiosk or chhatri, and guldasta, which is a small dome sphere that adorns every prominent corner of the mosque. Masjid Zahir is a state mosque in Al-Ustad city. It is also a landmark and symbol of Islamic architecture in the state of Kedah. Next, I'm going to show you the Mughal architectural elements of Masjid Zahir. The first 3 photos are showing the Islamic geometrical patterns are of the Moorish and Mughal influence and not of the Malays. Above them, left, the church's design is similar to that of the nimbus. Right, the sword plan chhatri is inspired by the Mughal architecture. Beside them are other elements from Masjid Zahir. First, the column. Classical Doric twin column supporting crenellated multifoil arch. Second, the opening. Projected veranda with multifoil arches, classical decorative columns, and decorative moldings. Third, the minaret. Dome open pavilion and large shutter, crenellated parapet, and the multi-foil arches and classical columns. Lastly, the roof elements: central onion dome, multi-mini domes, dome foyer entrance, crenellated parapet, decorative verandas, and lastly the chatteries. This is the Mughal architecture on Kuala Lumpur Railway Station. Kuala Lumpur Railway Station is designed in architecture style often described as Indo-Saracenic. The Indo-Saracenic style also features in the Jami' and Ubida mosques and many of the public buildings which the British built during the 19th century in India. The Indo-Saracenic architecture blends classical Western architecture with Mughal architecture, and the architecture of the Moorish Empire, of which is the Alhambra place in Granada, Spain, is a fine example. The architecture style is Molo Neo-Saracen architecture carried in by the British officer who served in India before coming to Malaya. The elements are carried in to demonstrate Malaya as an Islamic country. These arches serve to shade the loggia along with the building from the harsh tropical sunlight, besides providing an airy ambience to the loggia. The most conspicuous feature of the whole complex is its octagonal towers that flank the central block and the gables at both ends of the extended platform canopy. Each octagonal tower that encases the staircase is topped with a chatri, a mini pavilion-like structure with a dome on the top, a prominent feature of Mughal architecture whose lineage can be traced back to the Mughal Emperor Akbar's 16th century and the civic buildings in India during the rule of British Raj. Next is the Mughal architectural elements of Kuala Lumpur Railway Station. The KL Railway Station was built with Mughal features such as the elegant chhatris, which is dome-capped pavilions of Indian origin, along its roofline. The physical characteristic of the KL Railway Station. First is the opening. Projected veranda with multiple arches, classical decorative columns, and decorative molding. Second is the column, the classical Doric twin column supporting crenellated multifoil arch. Next is the minaret, dome open pavilion, a large shutter, crenellated parapet, and the multifoil arches and classical columns. Lastly, the roof elements, central onion dome, multi-mini domes, dome foyer entrance, crenellated parapet, decorative verandas, and the chatteries. Next is the Mughal architecture on Masjid Ubudiyah. The mosque is located beside the Royal Mausoleum on Jalan Istana at Bukit Chanda in Kuala Kangsar. The mosque was designed by Arthur Benison Hubback, who was also responsible for the design of Ipoh Railway Station and the Kuala Lumpur Railway Station. The mosque was built during the reign of 28th Sultan of Perak, Sultan Idris Murshidul Azam Shah First Ibni Almarhum Raja Bendahara Alang Iskandar Teja, who commissioned its construction as thanksgiving for his recovery from an illness that plagued him in his later years. The groundbreaking ceremony took place on 26 September 1913. The construction of the mosque was interrupted several times, once when two elephants belonging to the Sultan and Raja Chulang fought, ran over and damaged the Italian marble tiles. The outbreak of the First World War was also affected its construction. Next page is showing the Mughal architectural elements of Masjid Ubudiyah. The Ubudiyah Mosque is one of a kind with its grand bulbous dome, minarets and turrets. It is often regarded as one of the most beautiful mosques in Malaysia and is another legacy of the British colonial architecture in the country. The mosque was influenced by the Indo-Saracenic of the Mughal architecture. It is an octagon-shaped mosque and generally was designed symmetrically. A large bulbous dome hovers above the main prayer hall, accompanied by 4 octagonal minarets with church-style balconies. Turrets, mini-cupolas, and Moorish horseshoe-style arches complete the appearance of Mughal architectural grandeur. Internally at the main prayer hall, Moorish horseshoe-style arches dominate the space. A series of horseshoe arch windows lighted the main prayer hall, with intricate plaster works of molded cornices and ceilings, and a grand chandelier, creating a rich interior decoration. The Qibla wall is adorned with a horseshoe arch, denotes the mihrab niche, and an elevated timber mimbar pulpit is placed to its right. Next is the physical characteristic of the Masjid Ubaidiyah. The entrance arch faces the direction of Qibla, carved with Islamic pattern influenced by Moorish architecture. Second, the entrance, characterized by its massive size and elevated gateway, it's a characteristic of Mughal architecture. Next is the Islamic pattern. The Islamic pattern influenced by Moorish architecture to add the serene ambience of Ubaidiyah Mosque. Lastly, the floor plan, which was originally octagon shape before amended.
For Andalusian architecture in Malay Archipelago, Islamic architecture was developed in North Africa and southwestern Europe, particularly in the Iberian Peninsula, Spain and Portugal. It was the style of architecture there during 8th to the 15th century. Spanish architecture towards the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th was characterized by the development of a variety of styles, including Neo-Muslim.
Next slide, I'm going to show you the building influenced by Andalusian architecture in Malaysia on Sultan Abdul Samad building. And I'm going to talk about the element of Moorish of its building. The first is the arches. One of the main features of Moorish architecture is the consistent use of arches. The arches found of exterior building are of the arches were made of bricks and white pointed plastered blocks. The arches are of pointed horseshoe type with varying spans within the arch and giving it a stripe pattern. As time went by, the horseshoe shape made way for the intricate arches that curve to a point. Next is the clock tower. The clock tower on the axis appears to be balanced by 2 towers. The location of the clock tower in the center of the building shows our symbolism country as democratic, Islamic and economically stable country. At the front, the horseshoe arch is brick and stone placed alternately within the arch and giving it a stripe pattern. Next is the horseshoe arches. The shape of Sultan Abdul Samad building has diverse architecture forms such as Islamic form. The building is surrounded by the horseshoe arch to perform the repetition. The minaret constructed square and circle to support the domes on top. This constructed at the facade of the building make it unity in a design and represented certain meaning in Islamic religions. Next is the old century bricks. The Sultan Abdul Samad building, which is widely used, the facing brick with the natural color to suit environment. The bricks widely used for wall surfaces, minarets, and columns. The arches, posts, and sculpture are constructed by concrete. The sharp contrast of dark and light colors in the Alhambra materials chosen for their decoration are often shaped to reflect, and to be transformed by light and shade. The next element from the Sultan Abdul Samad building is the prayer hall. The arches and the strapwork and replicate is similar in Cordoba, Spain, but attached to a semi-open form because of the tropical weather. There are 3 domes around the prayer hall. The central dome is 21.3 meters, 7 feet high, and is flanked by 2 lower domes. Next is the pinnacle spires. The narrow spires are typical Moorish architectural motif. Next is the Moorish minaret. The pattern of red and white striped minaret which form as brick and plaster, 26.8 meter, also 88 feet high, identical in design with chartreuse, umbrella-shaped cupolas, usually dome and open-sided on the top. Next is the horseshoe arches. The pattern form is pre-Islamic Sirah and a symbol sainthood and holiness. Next, the bulbous or onion-shaped dome. The architecture style of the mosque has been described as Arabesque and Mughal, eclectic, and consists of 3 onion-shaped domes with chachi pavilions. There are 3 domes surround prayer hall. The central dome is 21.3 meters, 17 feet high, and is flanked by 2 lower domes. The domes were made of timber covered with the bitumen and felt material and painted white. Lastly, the wall, striking red brick and marble building and inspired by North Indian Islamic architecture or Mughal architecture, used to keep the mosque cool during daytime, warm during nighttime. The brick also burned in natural and pleasant colors of burnt day. Next is I'm going to talk about the building influenced by the Andalusian architecture on the Johor State Administrative Center, and I'm going to tell you about the element of Moorish of its building. First is the exterior of Kota Iskandar. The Moorish Andalusian style of architecture in the central person translated into gardens created inspired by the concept of Alhambra and the general life in Spain. The area is designed as a residential site with the concept of the famous architecture of the Court of the Lions in Alhambra, named with 3 landscaping areas named ALYA, Sermen, and Lama Firdaus, which are fenced along the interior and exterior areas of the building, whose layout is themed on the traditional Islamic garden. Next is the exterior building. Connecting 2 main buildings, namely the State Assembly Building, Sultan Ismail Building, and the Office of the Chief Minister and State Secretary, Datuk Jaafar Muhammad Building. The design of the building, landscape, and environment of Kota Iskandar combines the feature found in the Sultan Ibrahim Building, the architecture of the Alhambra Palace, and more Andalusian as well as the Johor Malay style. Next, the interior building. The symbol of absolute power between of the 2 departments is inspired by the traditional mace or scepter that symbolizes the sovereignty of king and inspired by Moorish Andalusian architecture, combining space, air, and light in honor of the continuing administrative power. The art of carving from the result of Johor's post-economic symbols, pineapple and spices, interspersed with the pattern from the conference hall and Jauhar skylight above from the lobby of the gem-shaped Jauhar atrium. Jauhar in Arabic means precious gem in conjunction with the signal stick of Johor. The central black bear a resemblance to the Sultan Ibrahim building, most notably its sloping ental tower with horseshoe arch inspired by the more Andalusian architecture tradition of the Alhambra. Lastly, the hall building. The conference hall pays homage to the Andalusian of the Alhambra Palace and more Andalusian as well as the traditional house of Johor. The Limas house with a gem-shaped transparent roof called Jauhar for the hall and sunlight. The room with the height of 6 majesty is highlighted again by a dome-shaped skylight that towers high. Engraved on the main wall panel behind the stage of the king and speaker are the Kalimah Allah. The last slide is going to be the building influenced by Indonesian architecture on Astaka Morocco Pavilion Prajaja, and I'm also going to talk about the element of Moorish of its building. The first element of the building is the Moorish style. The Moroccan pavilion is divided into 3 grand courtyards. The entrance courtyard, King Court, and Granada Court, each protected by the Amate Gate called City Gate, Palace Gate, and the Splendor Gate, respectively. The water fountain situated in the center of the Granada Court was modeled after the Lion's Court of Alhambra. Next, the walls. The walls of the courtyards are adorned with the geometric patterns that convey symmetry, decorative calligraphy, showcasing Quranic verse, or a stunning and colorful mosaic of ceramic tiles called zalich. Lastly, the pavilion has 3 gates, featuring a pattern of a survey art showing replicas of buildings found in Morocco and Andalusian, distinct white walls and pendant stucco roofs and decorative arabesque arches with semicircular niches. And these are the pictures of the Lambercan arches style. And that's all from us in the group 13. Thank you, and Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.